After my only son's funeral, my daughter-in-law inherited $320 million and threw me out of my own house, saying, "Now you're just a useless old woman." That's when my lawyer laughed. "Did you even read the will?" She never expected to lose so much. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never imagined that burying my only son would be the second worst day of my life. The worst was still to come. The funeral home smelled of lilies and grief. I sat in the front row, clutching a tissue that had long since become useless, watching as they lowered Marcus into the ground. 28 years old. Gone from a heart attack that the doctors said was brought on by stress and poor health. My baby boy, who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him, was now 6 feet under. Ellie sat beside me, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. 28 years old, blonde, beautiful in that artificial way that money can buy. She'd been married to Marcus for barely 2 years, but she played the grieving widow perfectly. The black dress, the trembling lip, the way she leaned into the sympathy of the other mourners. I should have seen it then, the performance. But grief makes you blind to a lot of things. He was so young, Mrs. Henderson from next door whispered, patting my shoulder. Such a tragedy, Janice. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Marcus had been my world after his father died 12 years ago. We'd built everything together, the construction company, the real estate investments, the life. We'd carved out of nothing. When he married Ellie, I thought I was gaining a daughter. How wrong I was. The service ended, and people began to drift away. Ellie stood up, smoothing her dress, and I noticed something that chilled me. Her tears had stopped. Just like that. As if someone had turned off a faucet. "Janice," she said, her voice suddenly crisp and businesslike. "We need to talk." I followed her back to the house, my house, the one I'd lived in for 35 years, the one my husband and I had bought when Marcus was just a baby. Ellie had moved in after the wedding, and I'd been happy to have the company. The house felt too big for just me. She led me into the living room, where Marcus's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was waiting with a briefcase. I'd known Peterson for years. He'd handled my husband's will, our business contracts, everything. But today, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Please, sit down, Mrs. Janice," Peterson said, his voice gentle but formal. Ellie remained standing, and there was something different about her posture. Confident. Predatory, almost. "I'll get straight to the point," Peterson continued, opening his briefcase. Marcus's will was very specific. His entire estate, including the house, the business, and all investments, totaling approximately $320 million, has been left to his wife, Eleanor. The words hit me like a physical blow. $320 million. Everything Marcus and I had built together. Everything I thought would keep me secure in my old age. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Marcus always said he'd take care of me. He promised." Ellie finally spoke, and her voice was nothing like the sweet, caring tone she'd used for the past 2 years. "He did take care of you, Janice. For 62 years, you lived your life. Now it's my turn." I stared at her, this woman I'd welcomed into my home, into my family. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this is my house now. My money. My life." She walked to the mantelpiece and picked up a framed photo of Marcus as a little boy. "You're no longer needed here." The room started to spin. "Ellie, this is my home. I've lived here for over 3 decades. Not anymore." She set the photo down and turned to face me fully. "I want you out by the end of the week." Peterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Eleanor, perhaps we could discuss some arrangement. For Mrs. Janice to remain in the guest house, or, no." Ellie's voice was firm. "She goes. All of her things, out. I'm renovating anyway, and I don't want any reminders of the past cluttering up my new life." I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, but something deeper. My sense of who I was, of where I belonged in the world. "Marcus would never have wanted this," I managed to say. Ellie laughed, and it was the coldest sound I'd ever heard. "Marcus is dead, Janice. What he wanted doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what's legal, and legally, everything belongs to me now." She walked closer to where I sat, and I could smell her expensive perfume. "You're just an old woman with no purpose now. No use to anyone. You couldn't even take proper care of your own son. Look how he ended up. Stressed, unhealthy, dead. At 28. Some mother you were." The words were designed to hurt, and they succeeded. Every doubt I'd ever had about my parenting, every moment I'd wondered if I could have done better, came rushing back. Marcus had struggled with his weight, with anxiety, with finding his place in the world. Had I failed him somehow? "That's enough." A new voice said from the doorway. I turned to see a woman I didn't recognize. She was perhaps 45, with short dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. She wore a simple black suit and carried a leather briefcase. "Who are you?" Ellie demanded, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Aria Mitchell, attorney at law. The woman stepped into the room and extended her hand to me. Mrs. Janis, I'm so sorry for your loss. I shook her hand, confused. I don't understand. Mr. Peterson has been our family lawyer for years. Aria smiled, and there was something knowing in her expression. Actually, Mrs. Janis, Marcus hired me 3 weeks before his death to handle some specific legal matters. Matters that Mr. Peterson wasn't made aware of. Peterson frowned. What kind of matters? Marcus never mentioned hiring additional counsel. The kind of matters, Aria said, opening her briefcase and pulling out a thick manila envelope, that involve ensuring his mother's future was properly secured. Ellie's face went pale. What are you talking about? I have his will right here. Everything comes to me. You have a will, yes, Aria agreed. But tell me, Mrs. Eleanor, did you happen to read all the terms and conditions? All the fine print? The silence in the room was deafening. I watched as uncertainty flickered across Ellie's face for the first time since Marcus's death. Of course I read it, Ellie said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Aria's smile widened slightly, and for the first time in days, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Well then, she said, settling into a chair across from us, this should be very interesting indeed. Peterson leaned forward, clearly as confused as I was. Mrs. Mitchell, if you have information relevant to this estate, I think we all deserve to know what it is. Oh, you will, Aria said, her eyes fixed on Ellie's increasingly uncomfortable expression. But first, I think Mrs. Eleanor should tell us exactly how she plans to fulfill the conditions of her inheritance. What conditions? Ellie's voice had risen an octave. Aria opened the manila envelope and pulled out what looked like several legal documents. The ones that determine whether you actually get to keep those $320 million, of course. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ellie stood frozen by the mantelpiece, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the edge so hard her knuckles had turned white. Peterson looked like he wanted to disappear into his briefcase, and I sat there feeling like I was watching a movie where I couldn't quite follow the plot. I think, Aria said calmly, placing the documents back into her envelope, we should give Mrs. Janis some time to process recent events before we discuss the full details of Marcus's final wishes. Ellie's mask was slipping. The composed widow was being replaced by something sharper, more desperate. No. If there are conditions, I want to know what they are right now. All in due time, Aria replied, standing up. Mrs. Janis, would you like me to help you gather some things? I'm sure you'll want to stay somewhere comfortable while we sort through the legal complexities. I nodded, still feeling numb. As we walked upstairs to my bedroom, I could hear Ellie's voice rising behind us, demanding answers from Peterson that he clearly didn't have. Who are you really? I whispered once we were out of earshot. Aria closed the bedroom door softly behind us. Exactly who I said I am. Marcus came to me about a month before he died. He was concerned about his wife's behavior, her intentions. He wanted to make sure you were protected. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the bed I'd shared with my husband for 23 years before he passed. Protected from what? From exactly what just happened downstairs. Aria sat beside me. Marcus knew Ellie better than she thought he did. The memories came flooding back then. Things I'd pushed aside, explained away, ignored because I wanted so badly to believe that my son had found happiness. It started about 6 months after Marcus married Ellie. I'd always been close to my son, but suddenly our weekly dinners became monthly, then occasional. When I asked him about it, he said Ellie felt uncomfortable, that I was too involved in their marriage. She just needs time to adjust, Mom, he'd said. You can be a little overwhelming sometimes. Overwhelming. The word had stung, but I'd backed off. I wanted them to be happy. Then there were the changes in Marcus himself. He'd always been a social person, loved having friends over, going out. But gradually, their social circle narrowed to just Ellie's friends. His old buddies from college, from work, they all seemed to drift away. People change when they get married, I'd told myself. That's normal. But it wasn't normal. Not the way Marcus started looking tired all the time. Not the way he'd glance at Ellie before answering even simple questions, as if seeking permission. Not the way he stopped talking about the future of our family business, the construction company we'd built together. I remember when she first showed up, I told Aria. Marcus met her at some charity event downtown. She was volunteering, working with underprivileged children, she said. She seemed so sweet, so caring. Aria's expression was grim. What charity was it? I tried to remember. Something with children's literacy? I can't recall the exact name. Why? Because I've checked, Mrs. Janis. There was no literacy charity at that event. Ellie was there as a paid companion for one of the older gentlemen attending. A gentleman who died 6 months later, leaving her a substantial sum in his will. The words hit me like ice water. What are you saying? I'm saying your daughter-in-law has done this before. Marcus wasn't her first wealthy husband, and she had no intention of him being her last. I thought about all the little things that hadn't made sense. How Ellie never talked about her past, her family. How she claimed to be estranged from everyone, making Marcus feel sorry for her. How she always had just enough medical issues to need expensive treatments, emotional crises that required luxury vacations to recover from. The jewelry, I whispered, remembering. She was always buying expensive jewelry, saying it was for special occasions. But then pieces would disappear. She'd say they were being cleaned or repaired. She was likely selling them and replacing them with cheaper copies, Arya confirmed. A common tactic. Slowly liquidating assets while making it look like nothing's missing. My chest felt tight. Marcus knew. He was starting to figure it out. That's why he came to me. Arya pulled out a small recording device from her purse. He asked me to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. He looked terrible, Mrs. Janice. Exhausted, stressed. He said he'd been finding evidence that Ellie was planning something. She pressed play, and my son's voice filled the room. He sounded older than his 28 years, weary in a way that broke my heart. I found papers hidden in her things, Marcus's recorded voice said. Research on heart attack symptoms, natural causes of death in young men. At first I thought maybe she was worried about my health, but then I found the life insurance policies. 3 of them, all taken out in the past year, all with her as beneficiary. I gasped. Life insurance? Arya nodded. Totaling $5 million. Policies that Ellie thought Marcus didn't know about. The recording continued. She's been putting something in my coffee, I think. Some kind of supplement, she says. For my heart. But I've been feeling worse since she started giving it to me. Chest pains, shortness of breath. I went to a doctor on my own, had blood tests done. There were traces of stimulants in my system. Things that could trigger heart problems. I felt sick. She was poisoning him? Not exactly poisoning, Arya said grimly. More like creating the conditions for a natural death. Stimulants can cause heart problems in susceptible individuals. Combined with stress, poor diet, lack of sleep. It's a slower method, but harder to detect. I stared at the recording device, horror washing over me. Why didn't he leave her? Why didn't he call the police? Because he needed proof. And because, despite everything, part of him still loved the woman he thought he'd married. Arya's voice was gentle. He was planning to gather more evidence, to build a case. But he ran out of time. The bedroom door suddenly burst open. Ellie stood there, her face flushed with anger. What are you two whispering about up here? Arya calmly slipped the recording device back into her purse. Just helping Mrs. Janice pack a few essentials. Well, hurry up. I want her out of here tonight, not at the end of the week. Ellie's eyes were cold, calculating. And whatever little scheme you think you're cooking up with your mystery lawyer, Janice, it won't work. Marcus left everything to me. Everything. She turned on her heel and left, her heels clicking angrily down the hallway. Arya waited until we heard her footsteps on the stairs, then looked at me with something that might have been satisfaction. Mrs. Janice, do you remember what I asked Ellie downstairs? About reading all the terms and conditions of the will. I nodded. Well, here's what she doesn't know. Arya's smile was sharp now, predatory. There isn't just one will. 2 days after the funeral, I was sitting in a small hotel room downtown, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Arya had insisted on paying for the room, saying it was better for me to be somewhere Ellie couldn't find me while we sorted through what she called the complications. I felt hollow. 62 years old, and everything I'd built, everything I'd believed in, was gone. The woman I'd welcomed as a daughter had thrown me out like garbage, and my son was dead. The worst part wasn't even losing the house or the money, it was the growing certainty that I'd failed Marcus somehow, that I should have seen what was happening to him. A soft knock at the door interrupted my spiral of self-pity. I opened it to find Arya holding a manila envelope and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. Mrs. Janice, may I come in? There's something Marcus left for you. I stepped aside, and she entered, settling into the room's single chair while I sat on the edge of the bed. Before we discuss the legal complications, Arya said carefully, Marcus asked me to give you this if anything happened to him. She handed me the envelope. He wrote it 3 weeks before he died. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter in Marcus's handwriting, the same messy scrawl I'd been reading since he was 7 years old. Mom, it began, and I had to stop reading because the tears came so fast I couldn't see. Arya quietly handed me a tissue. Take your time. I wiped my eyes and started again. Mom, if you're reading this, it means my worst fears came true. I know. You're probably blaming yourself right now, wondering what you could have done differently. Stop. This isn't your fault that I've been such a fool. Ellie isn't who I thought she was. I don't think she ever loved me, Mom. I think she saw me as a way to get to our money, our family business, everything we built together. I have proof now, but I don't know if I'll have time to use it. She's been giving me something. Pills, powders in my coffee. She says they're vitamins, supplements for my heart. But I feel worse every day. I've been to 3 different doctors on my own, and they all say the same thing: I'm being slowly poisoned with stimulants that are putting massive strain on my cardiovascular system. I know how this sounds. I know it seems impossible that the sweet woman you welcomed into our family could be capable of something like this. But I've done research, Mom. This is what she does. I found records of 2 other men who died under similar circumstances after marrying her. Both heart attacks. Both left her everything. I'm writing this because I need you to know that whatever happens, I love you. You were the best mother anyone could ask for. You worked 3 jobs to put me through college. You built a business from nothing and taught me everything I know. You sacrificed your entire life for me, and I repaid you by falling for the first pretty face that showed me attention, but I'm going to fix this, Mom. I've been working with a lawyer named Aria Mitchell, and we've set up protections for you. Ellie thinks she's going to inherit everything, but she's wrong. The will she knows about isn't the real one. I need you to trust Aria. She'll explain everything when the time is right. And Mom, when this is all over, I need you to promise me something. Don't spend the rest of your life taking care of everyone else. Take care of yourself for once. Travel. Buy that little house by the lake you always talked about. Be happy. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the pain of losing me. But I swear to you, she won't get away with this. All my love, Marcus. I was sobbing by the time I finished. Not just from grief, but from relief. My son had known. He'd tried to protect me. I wasn't the fool I thought I was. He'd seen through Ellie's act too. There's more, Aria said gently. She pulled out another document from her briefcase. This is the real will, Mrs. Janice. The one Marcus signed in my office 4 days before he died. I took the document with trembling hands. The legal language was confusing, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Primary beneficiary. Janice Morrison, estate valued at approximately $320 million. I don't understand, I whispered. But the will Peterson read was deliberately created to be a decoy, Aria explained. Marcus knew Ellie would expect to inherit everything, so he gave her exactly what she expected to see. But the real will, the one that's been properly filed and notarized, leaves everything to you. But how? Peterson has been our family lawyer for 20 years. Aria's expression darkened. Peterson has been having financial troubles lately. Gambling debts, from what I understand. Marcus discovered that Ellie had been meeting with him, paying him to ensure certain outcomes. Peterson thought he was just adjusting some minor details in the will to favor Ellie. He had no idea Marcus was setting up an entirely separate legal framework. I stared at the document in my hands. So the house, the business, everything, belongs to you. Always has, technically. Marcus never actually transferred ownership of the major assets to himself when he took over managing them. In the eyes of the law, you've been the primary owner all along. He was just administering them for you. The room was spinning. But Ellie moved out $320 million from accounts that will be frozen the moment I file this paperwork. Tomorrow morning, Aria said with satisfaction. Every transaction she's made in the past week will be reversed. Every penny she spent will need to be accounted for. I thought about Ellie's shopping spree the day after the funeral. I'd driven past the boutique district on my way to the hotel. And seen her coming out of 3 different designer stores, arms full of shopping bags, laughing with friends. What about the conditions you mentioned? The ones she needs to fulfill. Aria's smile was sharp. That's the beautiful part. Marcus included very specific conditions in the decoy will. Ellie has to demonstrate that she can properly care for you, his beloved mother, for a period of no less than 18 months. She has to provide suitable housing, healthcare, and emotional support. But she threw me out. Exactly. Which means she's already in violation of the terms, even according to the fake will. But here's the really clever part, Marcus said it. Up so that if she fails to meet these conditions, everything goes to a backup beneficiary. Who? A charity for elderly care. Every single penny. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything. So Ellie has already lost it all? Not quite yet. She has 30 days to remedy the violation. 30 days to convince you to come back and to prove she can take proper care of you. Aria's eyes gleamed. Of course, she doesn't know that it doesn't matter what she does, because the real will supersedes everything. But watching her try should be quite entertaining. I thought about Marcus's letter, about his request that I stop taking care of everyone else and start taking care of myself. What happens now? Now, Mrs. Janice, we let Ellie dig herself deeper into the hole she's created. Tomorrow, I'll inform Peterson and Ellie about the conditions and the will she thinks is real. We'll watch her scramble to try to win you back. And then, when she's exhausted herself trying to prove she deserves an inheritance that was never really hers, Arya stood up, straightening her jacket. Then we show her the truth. She paused at the door. Oh, and Mrs. Janice? You might want to start thinking about what you'd like to do with that lake house your son mentioned. I have a feeling you're going to have plenty of time and resources to make it a reality. As the door closed behind her, I looked down at Marcus's letter again. My boy had been braver and smarter than I'd ever given him credit for. He'd seen what I'd missed, and he'd protected me even from beyond the grave. For the first time since the funeral, I smiled. The call came at 8:30 the next morning, just as I was finishing the hotel's complimentary breakfast. Ellie's name flashed on my phone screen, and for the first time in days, I actually wanted to answer it. Janice? Her voice was different now. Strained. The confidence from 3 days ago had cracked. We need to talk. Do we? I kept my voice neutral, though inside I was buzzing with anticipation. Yes, we do. There's been a misunderstanding about Marcus's will. Can you come to the house? Please? The please was new. I almost smiled. I'll be there in an hour. When I arrived, Peterson's car was already in the driveway alongside Ellie's. I could see them through the living room window, Ellie pacing like a caged animal while Peterson sat hunched over his briefcase, looking like a man who'd just realized he was in way over his head. I knocked on my own front door, which felt surreal. Ellie opened it, and I barely recognized her. The perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept. Janice, thank God you're here, she said, grabbing my arm and pulling me inside. There's been a terrible mistake. Peterson stood up when he saw me, his face pale. Mrs. Janice, I owe you an enormous apology. When I reviewed Marcus's will more thoroughly last night, I discovered some conditions that I overlooked during the initial reading. I sat down in my own living room, in the chair where I'd read bedtime stories to Marcus 30 years ago, and folded my hands in my lap. What kind of conditions? Ellie jumped in before Peterson could answer. Apparently, Marcus wanted to make sure you were properly cared for. The inheritance isn't just automatic, I have to prove that I can take care of you first. For how long? I asked, though I already knew the answer. 18 months, Peterson said miserably. During which time you must live here, in the family home, and Mrs. Eleanor must demonstrate that she can provide appropriate care, including housing, healthcare, emotional support, and companionship. I watched Ellie's face as he spoke. She was trying to look contrite, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. 18 months of pretending to care about me in exchange for $320 million. In her mind, it probably seemed like a reasonable trade-off. And if she fails to meet these conditions? I asked. Peterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Then the entire estate goes to the Henderson Foundation for Elderly Care. Ellie's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw pure fury flash across her face. Then she composed herself and turned to me with what she probably thought was a winning smile. Janice, I know we got off to a rough start the other day. I was grieving, not thinking clearly. You know how much Marcus loved you. Of course I want to take care of you. Your family. Family. The word felt like poison coming from her lips. Where would I stay? I asked. You made it quite clear that you wanted me out of the house. You can have the master bedroom, she said. Quickly. I'll take the guest room. Whatever you need to be comfortable. I pretended to consider this. And my things? You said you wanted all reminders of the past gone. She laughed, but it sounded forced. I was just emotional. Your things belong here. This is your home. Peterson was watching this exchange with growing unease. I could tell he was beginning to understand that he'd been played, that whatever arrangement he thought he had with Ellie was falling apart. I'll need some time to think about this, I said finally. It's a big decision. Of course, Ellie said, though I could see her struggling to maintain her composure. Take all the time you need. Actually, I said, standing up, I think I'd like to see how committed you are to this arrangement. If I'm going to trust you with my care for 18 months, I need to see some evidence that you've changed. What do you mean? I mean I'd like you to demonstrate your commitment. Starting today. I looked around the living room, noting the expensive vases and artwork that Ellie had already brought in. For instance, you could drive me to my doctor's appointment this afternoon. And perhaps we could have dinner together. Here. Something you cook yourself. Ellie's smile became strained. Of course. I'd love to cook for you. I knew for a fact that Ellie had never cooked a meal in her life. Marcus had mentioned several times how they always ate out or ordered in, how Ellie claimed she was too creative for domestic tasks. Wonderful. I'll be back at 3 for the doctor's appointment. We're seeing Dr. Martinez about my blood pressure medication. This was a lie, I didn't have a blood pressure problem, but I wanted to see how far Ellie would go to maintain her charade. After I left, I drove to a coffee shop where Arya was waiting for me. How did it go? She asked as I sat down across from her. Like watching a spider pretend to be a butterfly, I said. She's panicking, but she's trying to hide it. The question is, how long can she keep up the act? Not long, I suspect. I've been doing some more research into her background. Would you like to know what I found? I nodded. Ellie Morrison, which, by the way, isn't her real name, has been married 4 times in the past 15 years. Each husband died within 2 years of the marriage. Heart attacks, strokes, sudden illnesses. And each time, she inherited substantial sums. My blood ran cold. 4 times? The first was a businessman in Nevada. 65 years old, died of a heart attack 6 months after their wedding. Left her $2 million. The second was in Arizona, a retired lawyer, died of a stroke. She inherited his house and investments, worth about $8 million. The third was in Colorado. Another businessman, another heart attack, another inheritance. What happened to the money? She goes through it quickly. Expensive lifestyle, bad investments, generous gifts to the next potential husband. By the time she spent it all, she's already found her next target. I thought about Marcus, about how quickly their relationship had moved. They'd met in January, were engaged by March, married in June. At the time, I'd thought it was romantic. Now I saw it for what it was, a predator moving in for the kill. There's something else, Arya continued. I had a private investigator do some digging. Ellie has been meeting with a real estate agent for the past month. She's been looking at properties in the Bahamas. Expensive properties. She was planning to leave the country the moment the estate was settled. But now she's trapped. She can't access the majority of the funds without fulfilling the conditions of the will, and she can't fulfill the conditions without staying here and playing house with you for 18 months. I sipped my coffee, thinking about Ellie's desperation. This morning. She'll try to find a way around it. I'm sure she will. But here's the thing, Mrs. Janice, every day she spends trying to manipulate the situation is another day she's not accessing the real money. And every day she's not accessing the money is another day she's burning through what little she has left. What do you mean? Arya pulled out a bank statement. I have contacts in the financial industry. Ellie's personal accounts show some interesting patterns. She's been living off credit cards and loans, anticipating a big payoff. She owes approximately $400,000 to various creditors. She was counting on Marcus's inheritance to pay them off and start fresh somewhere else. And now she's stuck in a game she can't win, with debts she can't pay, trying to convince a woman she despises to trust her. Arya smiled. It's quite poetic, really. I returned to the house at exactly 3 o'clock. Ellie was waiting by the door, dressed nicely and holding car keys. She looked like she'd spent the intervening hours practicing her caring daughter-in-law expression. Ready for your appointment? She asked brightly. Actually, I said, I called Dr. Martinez's office and rescheduled for next week. I thought instead, we could spend the afternoon going through some of Marcus's things together, as a family activity. I watched her face fall, though she tried to recover quickly. Of course. That sounds lovely. We spent 3 hours in Marcus's childhood bedroom, going through boxes of his school papers, old photographs, sports trophies. I told stories about each item, watching as Ellie grew increasingly restless. She kept checking her phone, shifting in her seat, clearly desperate to be anywhere else, but she stayed. She smiled. She made appropriate noises of interest and sympathy. By 6 o'clock, when I suggested she start cooking dinner, she looked like she was about to snap. What would you like? She asked through gritted teeth. Oh, something simple. Marcus always loved my pot roast. Do you know how to make pot roast? The look of panic that flashed across her face was almost worth the price of admission. Of course. Pot roast. No problem. I settled into the living room with a book, listening to the increasingly frantic sounds coming from the kitchen. Pots clattering. The microwave beeping repeatedly. At one point, I heard her on the phone, presumably trying to get instructions from someone. 2 hours later, she emerged with what might generously be called food. The roast was burned on the outside and raw in the middle. The vegetables were either mushy or hard as rocks. The gravy looked like it had the consistency of cement. It's perfect, I said, taking a bite and trying not to wince. Just like Marcus used to make. As I watched Ellie force down her own cooking, I realized that Arya was right. This was going to be quite entertaining indeed. 2 weeks into our twisted living arrangement, Ellie was coming apart at the seams. I'd moved back into my house, into the master bedroom as she'd promised, and watched as she tried desperately to play the role of the caring daughter-in-law. Every morning, she'd knock on my door with breakfast on a tray, usually something she'd ordered from a restaurant and transferred to our dishes. She'd ask about my plans for the day, offer to drive me places, inquire about my health with the kind of forced concern that made my skin crawl, but I could see the cracks. The way her hands shook when she thought I wasn't looking. The phone calls she took in hushed, frantic whispers. The bills that kept arriving, credit card statements, loan notices, collection agency letters that she tried to hide from me. "Janice," she said one morning, setting down a tray with what looked like professionally made eggs Benedict, "I was wondering if we could discuss a small advance on the inheritance. Just to cover some household expenses." I looked up from the newspaper I was reading. "What kind of expenses?" "Well, you know, groceries, utilities, maintenance on the house. Taking care of you properly requires resources, and I want to make sure you have everything you need." "How much are we talking about?" She tried to look casual. "Maybe 500,000? Just to get us through the next few months comfortably." $500,000. To cover groceries and utilities. I had to admire her audacity. "I'll have to check with Peterson about whether that's allowed under the terms of the will," I said. "These legal documents can be so tricky." Her smile faltered. "Of course. No rush." But there was rush. I could see it in her increasingly desperate behavior. The way she'd started pawning jewelry pieces she thought I wouldn't notice. The way she'd begun having hushed arguments on the phone with people who were clearly creditors. That afternoon, Aria called with an update that made everything crystal clear. "I've been monitoring Ellie's financial situation," she said. "It's worse than we thought. She owes over 600,000 now, and the interest is compounding daily. She's been using Marcus's death certificate to try to get emergency loans. Telling creditors she's expecting a large inheritance soon." "How much time does she have?" "Based on the collection notices my contact in the industry has seen, maybe another week before they start seizing assets. Her car, her jewelry, anything she can't prove belongs to the estate." That evening, I decided it was time to turn up the heat. "Ellie," I said over dinner, Chinese takeout she'd tried to pass off as homemade stir-fry, "I've been thinking about the future. About what Marcus would have wanted." She looked up hopefully. "Yes? I think he'd want us to be honest with each other. Really honest." I set down my chopsticks and looked directly at her. "So I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." Her face went pale. "What? Did you love my son?" The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I watched emotions flicker across her face, surprise, calculation, something that might have been panic. "Of course I loved him," she said finally. "He was my husband." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you loved him." She stared at her plate. "I don't understand why you'd ask me something like that." "Because a mother knows, Ellie. A mother can tell when someone genuinely cares about her child and when they're just using him." Her head snapped up, and for a moment, I saw the real Ellie underneath the mask. Cold. Calculating. Furious at being questioned. "How dare you," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I was a good wife to Marcus. I took care of him." "Is that what you call it? Taking care of him?" I leaned forward. "Because from where I sat, it looked like you isolated him from his friends, controlled his social life, and stressed him to death." She stood up so fast her chair toppled over. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I remained seated, calm. "I know about the stimulants, Ellie. I know what you were putting in his coffee." The color drained from her face completely. "That's impossible. You can't know that. Marcus figured it out before he died. He had blood tests done. He documented everything." I watched as she began to shake. "Did you really think you could poison my son and I wouldn't find out?" "I never." She stopped herself, realizing she was about to confess. "Never what? Never meant to kill him? Never thought you'd get caught?" I stood up now, feeling calmer and more in control than I had in weeks. "Or never thought his mother would be smart enough to piece it together." Ellie was backing toward the door, her breath coming in short gasps. "You're crazy. You're a crazy old woman who can't accept that her son chose someone else." "Maybe I am crazy," I said, following her slowly. "But I'm not stupid. And I'm not blind. I see exactly what you are, Ellie. I've always seen it." She turned and ran upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard her on the phone, her voice high and panicked. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, desperation. The next morning, she was gone. I woke up to find a note on the kitchen counter. "I can't do this anymore. The stress of caring for you is too much. I'm going to stay with friends for a few days to clear my head." I called Aria immediately. "She's run," I told her. "Left a note saying she needs space." Perfect, Arya said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. She's just violated the terms of the will. According to the conditions, she's required to provide continuous care and companionship. Leaving you alone in the house, even for a few days, constitutes abandonment. So she's lost the inheritance? According to the fake will, yes. She has 24 hours to return and resume her duties, or everything goes to the Henderson Foundation. But I knew Ellie wouldn't be back. Not after last night's confrontation. She'd finally realized that I knew the truth about what she'd done to Marcus, and her survival instincts had kicked in. Sure enough, by that evening, there was still no sign of her. Arya arrived at 6 o'clock with Peterson in tow. The man looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. Mrs. Janice, he said miserably, I owe you the deepest apology. I allowed myself to be compromised, and I failed in my duties to your family. Yes, you did, I said simply. There was no point in making it easy for him. I'll be surrendering my license, he continued. And making full restitution for any damages my actions may have caused. That's between you and the State Bar Association. I replied. Right now, I'm more interested in what happens next. Arya opened her briefcase. Since Mrs. Eleanor has failed to fulfill the conditions of the will, the estate now transfers to the designated charity. However, she paused dramatically, there is one more document that needs to be reviewed. She pulled out the real will, the one Marcus had signed in her office. Peterson, she said, I need you to witness the reading of Marcus Morrison's true, final testament. For the next 30 minutes, we sat in my living room while Arya read aloud the document that returned everything to me. The house, the business, the investments, the bank accounts, all of it had always been mine. Marcus had never actually taken ownership, he'd simply been managing my assets. Peterson looked like he might faint. But the other will was a decoy, Arya explained patiently. Created to test Mrs. Eleanor's character and intentions. A test she failed spectacularly. As Peterson left, mumbling apologies and promises to make things right, I sat in the quiet house and thought about Marcus. About the clever, loving son who'd protected me even when I couldn't protect him. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Ellie. Janice, please, she said, her voice thick with tears. I made a mistake. Let me come back. I can take care of you, I promise. Where are you calling from? I asked. I'm at a motel downtown. I ran out of money for the hotel. I could picture it, Ellie Morrison, who'd spent the past 2 weeks planning how to spend $320 million, sitting in a cheap motel room with maxed out credit cards and nowhere to go. Ellie, I said gently, there's something you need to know about that inheritance you've been counting on. What? It was never yours to begin with. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, what are you talking about? The will Peterson read at the funeral? The one that left everything to you? It wasn't real. I heard her sharp intake of breath. That's impossible. Marcus created it specifically to test you. To see what kind of person you really were. And you showed us, didn't you? You showed us exactly who you are. The sound she made might have been a laugh or a sob. You're lying. The real will left everything to me. It always belonged to me. Marcus was just managing it. I paused, letting that sink in. You never had any claim to our family's money, Ellie. Not one penny. The line went dead that evening, as I sat in my living room, in my house, surrounded by my things. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. For the first time since Marcus's death, I wasn't afraid of the future. 3 months after Ellie disappeared from my life, I stood in the garden behind my house, watching the first green shoots of spring push through the dark soil. Marcus and I had planted this garden together when he was 12, back when he still thought spending Saturday mornings with his mother was the height of excitement rather than social suicide. The tulips were coming up exactly where we'd planted them 15 years ago. Some things, I realized, have deeper roots than others. Mrs. Janice? Arya's voice came from behind me. I turned to see her walking across the lawn, holding a thick folder. I have some final paperwork for you to review. We settled onto the porch swing that had been here since Marcus was a baby. The same swing where I'd rocked him through countless summers, where we'd shared ice cream and talked about his dreams for the future. What happened to her? I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know. Ellie? She's working as a waitress at a diner outside Phoenix. Her creditors caught up with her about 6 weeks ago. They seized her car, what jewelry she had left. She's living in a studio apartment and trying to pay off over $700,000 in debt. I felt a flutter of something that might have been sympathy, but it passed quickly. And the other families? The other men she married? I've been in contact with some of their relatives. There's talk of reopening those cases, now that we have evidence of her pattern of behavior. The recording Marcus made, combined with the medical evidence and financial records, paints a very clear picture. Arya opened her folder and pulled out a newspaper clipping. You might find this interesting. The headline read, "Local woman seeks answers in husband's mysterious death." Below it was a photo of a middle-aged woman holding a picture of a man I didn't recognize. That's Carol Hendricks, Arya explained. Her husband was Ellie's third victim in Colorado. She never believed he died of natural causes, but the police closed the case. She's been fighting for years to get it reopened. I studied the woman's face in the photograph. She had the same haunted look I'd worn for weeks after Marcus's funeral, the expression of someone who knows something is wrong but can't prove it. Will she get justice? I think so. With the evidence we've gathered, there's enough to build a strong case. It may not bring her husband back, but it might give her the closure she needs. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the yard. Finally, Arya spoke again. There's something else. A decision you need to make. She pulled out another set of documents. Marcus's business partners have been asking about the future of Morrison Construction. The company is yours now, of course, but they're wondering about your plans. I'd been dreading this conversation. The construction company had been my husband's dream, then Marcus's passion. But I was 62 years old, with no desire to spend my remaining years managing contracts and dealing with construction crews. I've been thinking about that, I said. What would you recommend? Well, there are several options. You could sell it outright, which would bring in approximately $15 million. Or you could restructure it as a cooperative, letting the employees buy shares over time while maintaining partial ownership yourself. I thought about the men and women who'd worked for our family business for decades. Some of them had been with us since Marcus was in high school. They'd attended his wedding, sent flowers to his funeral. They deserved better than having their jobs disappear because I didn't want the responsibility of running a company. The cooperative idea, I said. Tell me more about that. An hour later, we'd worked out the basic framework. The employees would gradually buy out the company over 10 years, with the profits continuing to provide me with a comfortable income. It felt right, letting the business continue in the hands of people who'd helped build it, while giving me the freedom to focus on other things. Speaking of other things, Arya said with a smile, have you given any more thought to that lake house Marcus mentioned in his letter? I had, actually. More than I cared to admit. For years, I'd driven past a small cottage on Lake Minnetonka, about an hour north of the city. It had a dock, a tiny garden, and windows that caught the morning sun. Every time I saw the "for sale" sign in the yard, I'd slowed down but never stopped. Maybe, I said. It might be nice to have somewhere quiet to go. I could make some calls. If you'd like. Find out what's available in that area. As Arya left, I walked through the house that had been my world for 35 years. Each room held memories, Marcus's first steps in the hallway, birthday parties in the dining room, quiet evenings reading in the living room while my husband worked late, but it also held darker memories now. The knowledge of what Ellie had done here, the stress and fear that had filled these walls during Marcus's final months. Maybe it was time for a change. That evening, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. Janice, dear, how are you holding up? She asked, her voice warm with genuine concern. Better, I said. Actually, I wanted to ask you something. Remember how you always said you wished you could expand your garden but didn't have enough space? Oh. Yes, I've always been envious of that beautiful backyard of yours. Would you be interested in buying this house? There was a long pause. Are you serious? Completely serious. I'm thinking of downsizing, and I'd rather sell to someone I know will take care of the place. We talked for another hour, working out the basics of a deal that would let her buy the house at a fair price while giving me enough to purchase the lake cottage and live comfortably for the rest of my life. 2 weeks later, I stood in the empty house, waiting for the moving truck to arrive. Most of the furniture would go to Mrs. Henderson. But I'd kept the important things, Marcus's baby pictures, my husband's tools, the quilt my mother had made for my wedding. The doorbell rang. And I opened it to find a young woman I didn't recognize. She was maybe 30, with short brown hair and tired eyes. Mrs. Morrison? My name is Sarah Chen. I was married to David Chen, in Colorado. It took me a moment to place the name. David Chen. He was Ellie's second husband, she said quietly. I've been following the news about your case. I wondered if we could talk. I invited her in, and we sat in the empty living room while she told me her story. David had been her college sweetheart, a kind man who'd worked as an accountant. After their divorce, amicable, she stressed, they'd remained friends. When he married someone named Eleanor Morrison, Sarah had been happy for him. But then he started changing, she said. He became anxious all the time, paranoid. He was convinced someone was trying to hurt him, but he wouldn't say who. When he died, I tried to tell the police that something was wrong, but they said it was clearly a heart attack brought on by stress. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. For what it's worth, I think you were right to trust your instincts. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I brought something for you. She pulled out a manila envelope. Letters that David wrote but never sent. I found them in his desk after he died. They're addressed to his mother, but she died years earlier. I think he was trying to work through what was happening to him. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Another man's desperate attempt to document the truth before it was too late. There's something else, Sarah continued. David had a life insurance policy. $500,000. The beneficiary was supposed to be his sister, but somehow it got changed to his wife just weeks before he died. The same pattern. The same careful, methodical destruction of a human life for money. Will you testify? I asked. If there's a trial? Absolutely. David deserves justice. They all do. After Sarah left, I sat in my car in the driveway, looking at the house one last time. Tomorrow, I'd be living in a cottage by the lake, starting the next chapter of my life. But tonight, I wanted to say goodbye properly. I walked around to the backyard, to the garden where the tulips were now in full bloom. Bright red and yellow faces turned toward the sun, exactly as Marcus and I had planned all those years ago. I'm going to be okay, sweetheart, I said to the empty air. You made sure of that. Your mom is finally going to take care of herself, just like you wanted. A breeze rustled through the leaves of the old oak tree where we'd hung a swing when Marcus was 8. For just a moment, I could almost hear his laughter echoing across the years. The next morning, I woke up in my new home for the first time. The cottage was tiny compared to the house I'd left behind, but it felt perfect. Through the bedroom window, I could see the lake stretching out like a mirror, reflecting the morning sky. I made coffee and carried it out to the dock, where I settled into a chair that had come with the house. The water lapped gently against the posts, and somewhere across the lake, I could hear a loon calling. My phone buzzed with a text from Aria. Ellie was arrested this morning in Phoenix. Multiple charges related to David Chen's death. More charges likely to follow. I set the phone aside without responding. That part of my life was over. Justice would take its course, but I didn't need to be consumed by it anymore. Instead, I pulled out a notebook and began making a list. Plans for the garden. Books I wanted to read. Places I might like to visit now that I had the time and resources to travel. At the top of the page, I wrote, things that make Janice happy. It was a short list, but it was mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt like enough.